Hello, everybody. My name is Amanda Nduga, and welcome to Deadline's virtual Sundance studio. I like to welcome the team from Passing. Please say hello to writer-director Rebecca Hall. Hi. And actors Tessa Thompson, Ruth Nega, and Andre Holland. Hey guys, thank you for joining us today. So Rebecca, let's start with you. Can you just talk about when you were first introduced to this film is obviously based on a book by Nella Larsen. Can you talk about when you were first introduced to this book and what inspired you to make this as your first feature?
Yeah, it's a sort of long story, but I'll try and keep it condensed. Essentially, it was at a time in my life when I was spending more time in America. I was thinking more about the American side of my family. My mother's from Detroit, Michigan, originally, and she is she's biracial, but it wasn't really spoken about. And I understood the context of that was that my grandfather, who I never knew, was white passing, and probably his parents were white passing. But when I say that we didn't use words like passing or biracial, it was because there was so much sort of confusion around the issue. Like, what is how much and what and who, and maybe it was a little bit this, maybe it was a little bit that. It was told to me in not very clear language, and I think that is common among a lot of these stories and an aspect of the legacy of passing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I read this book because I was just, at this point in my life, I was talking to more people about it, and I was asking more questions, and I was being more inquisitive, and I was trying to work out my position in relation to it all. And somebody gave me the book, and it felt for me a moment of historical contextualizing of the choices that these people in my family made. And I had words for it, and I had a sort of emotional understanding of it, and it affected me enormously. And I didn't entirely understand why. And I suppose the only way that I can come to terms with anything in my life has been through making art about it in some capacity. And I wrote a screenplay then, 14 years ago, didn't think it was really for anyone but me. And then over the years, it became increasingly obvious that I had to make the film, and I understood how I wanted to make it. I knew how I wanted it to look. And then I was really buoyed by the fact that I have extraordinary actors that I desperately wanted to be in it. I mean, I was thinking about the three people you're seeing here for a long time, and they said yes, and that was gave me a lot of confidence, I think, to continue.
And for the actors, specifically Tessa and Ruth. So obviously you played these two Black women who can pass as white throughout life, but kind of choose to go on different sides of the color line. Can you just each talk about what struck you about your character's journey when you were first introduced to this piece? And Ruth, we'll start with you.
Well, what struck me about Claire was the fact that she felt she had to make this choice to pass and sever herself from her past, her community, and in many ways herself. And the courage that took, but also the psychological cost of that. How do you live when you've buried such an important part of yourself? What does it cost when you're essentially adrift and isolated, and you have this secret, and that the burden of that, and the sense of longing that she has, and the danger that she puts herself really in of being found out to be herself, and what I loved was this relationship with Irene, because she really basically is this symbiosis. She really has what she wants, which is what she sees as as being fully herself, you know. And then Irene sees in Claire a sort of unbridled living of life, and covets that, and how they navigate that with one another. It's such a lovely evocation of friendship, with all the positives and negatives. And I was just so excited and thrilled by the challenge of playing that with Tessa. You know, I mean, it was such a thrill to see two women of color being center stage in a film. I've just, it's such a privilege to be part of it.
Yeah. And then what about you, Tessa? What were you what struck you about your character Irene's journey throughout this film?
Oh, so many things. Just hearing you speak just now, Ruth, it really occurs to me the extent to which they present two very different ideas in terms of not just obviously different sides of the color line, but also what your responsibility is to community and to your race. You know, Irene has this idea, this very righteous idea of self that has to do with responsibility and being dutiful, and yet she's also hemmed in by all those things, right? And is in some ways very repressed and oppressed by expectations, by society's expectations. Meanwhile, Claire bucks all of that, and like a ship without rudders can explore, right? And yet she wants to come back via Harlem to some sense of community, but not out of obligation, not out of responsibility, just because she misses proximity to Blackness. Nella talked about it, the way in which Claire goes, I miss hearing laughs. Like I just miss that proximity. And so I think there's this idea, you know, that Ruth has talked about before, this idea of like the tragic mulatto. And I think this book could also, and our film could get mired in those conversations. And to me, I think I was reading Bell Hooks talking about passing and lecturing to her students. And something that gets lost is the way in which Claire, what leads to her sort of demise in the end is not that she's passed for white, is that she's passed for white and come back to Blackness because of its pull. And I think in that way, it's like Nella's very complicated celebration of our beauty. And I know, you know, when Andre and I played these scenes where we're arguing about talking about the race problem, I think about myself. I'm not a parent, but how I would show up as a parent. I think the less you know about history, the easier it is to imagine you'd be on the right side of it. And so it was interesting to have to ask those questions of myself. If I were a woman at that time, I mean, you know, how would I have lived? What kind of Black person would I have been? It makes me think about what kind of Black person I am now, you know, relative to the time.
Yeah. And then that kind of leads me to my next question. Andre, your character, Brian, you know, interesting, unlike, you know, Claire or his wife in the film, Irene doesn't have the option of passing throughout this. So he confronts racism in a different way. We can see it through this, you know, the straightforwardness that he shows when he talks to his kids about racism. Did doing this film sort of inform your own understanding of identity when it relates to race, or how did this film sort of inform your own understanding of that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. You know, this was one of those times for me when I read it, I you know, really quickly aligned myself with Brian. I didn't have to go far to understand his point of view. I remember, you know, having similar such talks with my parents, you know, having grown up in Alabama. I mean, obviously the subject matter was slightly different, but, you know, the tone wasn't so different. The stakes were also were just as high. So has it informed my personal perception around race as, you know, through playing Brian? Not necessarily, but I certainly feel that I've learned a lot by watching Tessa and Ruth wrestle with the questions that their characters' journeys present.
And Rebecca, same question to you. Did this film, and in making of this film, did it inform your own understanding of identity in a race?
Yeah. I mean, and it made me embrace the fact that identity is hopelessly complex and often situationally determined. Often there are so many factors at play, and I think that it certainly has helped me to embrace a certain amount of ambiguity and paradox within myself. Like, you know, there's, yeah. I mean, it's like, there's a much longer answer to that, but
just lastly, how do you hope this film can sort of resonate with audience today? Because I mean, we still talk about race. There's issues of colorism that, you know, conversations that are still happening till today. How do you hope this film resonates with audience?
For one, I hope that, I think part of it's Nella Larsen's beauty with the novel is that it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I think that's important. But I also, you know, I think often films that situate themselves around narratives to do with race and America, they're often, you know, there are often acts of violence by a white oppressor on a community that act as sort of dramatic set pieces. And I think it's very rare to see stories that are about the more insidious aspects of living within a racist framework, about and how it affects interpersonal relationships and how it affects your understanding of yourself and your identity. Because I do think that identity is a sort of negotiation between how you want to be seen, how the story you tell about yourself, and the one that a society sort of throws at you, and how much you want to buck that or how much you want to accept that. And I think that tussle and that, you know, and the fact that this is a story that is that and not a larger story of oppression, but a quieter one, I think is really different. And, you know, it's the part of the reason that I found it so compelling.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congrats so much on the film, and good luck to everybody. Thank you guys.
Thank you.